Welcome back. Today we will finish up the Constitutional Convention by looking at how the Founding Fathers dealt with the institution of slavery. We'll also look at the two factions that emerged at the Constitutional Convention with very differing views on how much power the central government should have, Federalists and Anti-Federalists. And finally, we will ratify the document that has been the supreme law of the land since June 1788 and consider some of the major principles that have guided our government over the last 224 years. It's ratifying a new nation. The slavery issue is one of the final hurdles for delegates in Philadelphia. Slavery was the backbone of the Southern economy, thus Southern states demanded that their slaves count as people for the purposes of determining the number of representatives in the new House of Representatives. The North opposed this idea, for it would give the South an advantage as a result of the small number of slaves in the northern states. The North argued that slaves were property by law in the South and could not be counted as people. When delegates from Georgia and South Carolina threatened to walk out if slaves were not counted, compromise became necessary. What came to be known as the 3/5 Compromise said that slaves would be counted as 3/5 of a person when determining the number of representatives each state received in the House of Representatives. The South was satisfied with this as it compensated for its lower white population. Another issue was the slave trade. The South wanted to continue the trade while the North wanted to end it. In exchange for allowing slaves to be counted as 3/5 of a person, both sides would agree that the slave trade would end by 1808. The South believed that it would have enough slaves by that date to support its plantations. Also, the North agreed that slaves would not be taxed. So to review what both sides get in the 3/5 Compromise, the South will get their slaves counted as 3/5 of a person, which will increase the amount of representation they have in the House of Representatives, and also their slaves will not be taxed. On the northern side, they will get an end to the slave trade in 1808, and the South will agree to continue working on finishing the Constitution. Slavery will become a state issue at this point, as this is the only time it is mentioned in the Constitution. It will not take long for the institution to become a political powder keg and lead to increased strife between the North and the South in the decades to come. The verb ratify means to confirm by expressing consent, approval, or formal sanction. Before becoming the law of the land, the Constitution had to be ratified by state conventions. The Founding Fathers thought that ratification might be an issue nationwide, so they only required a 2/3 majority, 9 of 13, states to ratify the document before it became the law. Remember that the Articles of Confederation required a unanimous vote for change. Some states ratified quickly. Delaware was the first, while others were reluctant. And on June 21, 1788, New Hampshire ratified the document, making it the supreme law of the land. Rhode Island, which had always marched to the beat of a different drummer since its founding by Massachusetts castaways led by Roger Williams in the 17th century, finally agreed to ratify the Constitution only after being threatened by an economic boycott from the Congress. While debating whether to ratify the Constitution, two factions or groups emerged at the Constitutional Convention with different ideas regarding the new government. Federalists favored the new Constitution and a strong central government. Anti-Federalists opposed what they viewed as a federal government with too much power. It's very important that we note that these are not political parties, they are factions. These are two sides of the argument at the Constitutional Convention. We'll talk about the first political parties in our next unit. Prominent Federalists included the father of the Constitution, James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, who most of you know as the guy on the $10 bill, and soon you'll know as the first Secretary of the Treasury, and John Jay, who would become the first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Federalists stressed the need for a strong central government after the Articles of Confederation experience. They place a lot of emphasis on developing the American economy and public improvements. Federalists argued that principles like checks and balances and separation of powers in the Constitution protected the rights of individuals, thus a Bill of Rights was not necessary. They made their argument for ratification in a series of essays known as the Federalist Papers. Prominent anti-federalists included Virginians Thomas Jefferson, who we know from author of the Declaration of Independence, Patrick Henry, who famously said, "Give me liberty or give me death," and from Massachusetts, Sam Adams, one of the founders of the Sons of Liberty. Anti-Federalists believed that the authors of the Constitution had exceeded their power in writing a new document when they had been tasked with only revising the Articles of Confederation. They thought that the new government was given too much power, and they argued that the government was a threat to both the rights of the people and the states. Anti-Federalists believed that there should be stronger state governments and weaker federal government. Anti-Federalists argued for the inclusion of the Bill of Rights to protect the people from the government, and many Anti-Federalists would not accept the Constitution until a Bill of Rights was added. For Anti-Federalists, accepting the new Constitution hinged on the inclusion of protections for the rights of the people. In response, James Madison wrote 12 amendments to the Constitution. 10 of these would be accepted. The first 10 amendments to the Constitution are known as the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights allowed Anti-Federalists to accept the ratification of the Constitution, and these Bill of Rights were ratified by the states on December 15, 1791, 3 years after the Constitution itself was ratified. The Bill of Rights provides protection for some of the rights that make America unique in the world. The First Amendment says Americans have the freedom of speech, religion, and press. They have the right to assemble and to petition their government. The Second Amendment says Americans have the right to bear arms. The Third Amendment prohibits the government from quartering troops in the homes of citizens without their consent. The Fourth Amendment protects against unreasonable search and seizure, requiring law enforcement officials to possess a warrant and probable cause. Amendments 5 through 8 protect the rights of the accused, including double jeopardy, the right to a speedy trial, the Sixth Amendment's right to a trial by jury, protection from excessive bail, and cruel and unusual punishment. The Ninth Amendment says that the rights of the people are not just limited to those identified in the Constitution. And the Tenth Amendment, which will emerge as a major issue in the middle of the 19th century, says that those powers not given to the federal government belong to the states. Let's consider two documents written by prominent Virginians that were influential on the Bill of Rights. First, the Virginia Declaration of Rights. It was written by George Mason in May 1776. Notice that's before the Declaration of Independence. Mason listed a series of rights he thought were guaranteed to all Virginians, among them freedom of religion and press and the right to a trial by jury. These were rights that could not be taken away by the government. Mason's declaration was influential in the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights, and even in the French Revolution. The second document is the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom, written by Thomas Jefferson. This document was enacted in Virginia in 1786 and said that the government could not support one church over another. To quote the document, "All men shall be free to profess and by argument to maintain their opinion in matters of religion." Jefferson viewed this as one of his greatest accomplishments. As you can see on his tombstone, the statute, along with the Declaration of Independence and the University of Virginia, are what Jefferson most valued from his impressive body of work. It is important to understand that the document was very influential on the First Amendment to the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. The idea that one should have a freedom to practice whatever religion he or she wants to, or have the ability to not practice one at all, was crystallized in Jefferson's Statute for Religious Freedom in Virginia. Let's close the show by looking at some government principles that were created in the Constitution. Federalism divided powers between the national and state governments. As you can see here, some powers, like declaring war, establishing post offices, were left to the national government, while others, like establishing local governments, setting up schools, and regulating state commerce, were left to the state governments. And still some others, like collecting taxes, establishing courts, and borrowing money, were shared between both the national and the state government. The Constitution establishes 3 separate branches of government. This is known as the separation of powers. Each branch has its own specific responsibility. The legislative branch makes laws. The Congress will write laws before passing them on to the President. The executive branch enforces the laws. It is the role of the President to sign bills coming from Congress to make sure that they are enforced. The judiciary will interpret the laws. It's the job of the Supreme Court and other federal courts to make sure that laws are constitutional. The purpose of the separation of powers is to ensure that no one branch becomes too powerful. Remember the Founding Fathers' fear of the king. To further prevent one branch from getting too much power, the Founding Fathers used checks and balances, which is so no one branch could do anything without the support of one of the 2 other branches. Examples include the presidential veto. The President can veto laws passed by Congress. Also, the President has the power to appoint judges and government officials, but these appointees must be approved by the Senate. The House of Representatives can impeach the President, giving them the power to bring charges against the President if he has committed a crime. The House brings charges, and the Senate holds a trial to see if the President is guilty and ultimately removed from office. The judicial branch can declare laws passed by Congress and signed by the President as unconstitutional. With a new government in place, the United States would enter its infancy, a period known as the Early National Period. We will start this with the Washington administration next time, and until then, good night, Albuquerque.